how to read that damn thing, right? Because you should know automatically that probably represents a leaky channel. And sodium is doing facilitated diffusion following a concentration gradient from regions of higher to regions of lower. I'm hoping that's like, dude, I totally get that, that's spot on, that's what the diagram is trying to show me. If not, we got to get you there because we're going to be just picking up the level of information. But that's why, right? If I already asked you why does sodium come into a cell, you're going to say because of a concentration gradient. There's more sodium in the filtrate than there is in the cell. Now, if you just let that happen, eventually we're going to reach equilibrium and there's no more diffusion of sodium into the cell. So how can the cell maintain the ability to always have in the cell less sodium than there is in the filtrate? You need to keep removing this sodium that comes in. Remember the little trick I'm trying to tell you guys about when ions cross a membrane? Think of two things that it would cause to happen. A change in membrane potential, and then you got to have a pump to put the bugger back or to put it somewhere. So, sodium diffuses in. I can maintain that ability because in the basal membrane, which is important, that's where you find your sodium-potassium ATPase pumps. They're constantly pumping the sodium out. We have a couple of ways of getting sodium to come in. This is what's known as your sodium glucose symporter. It is a secondary active transporter. It's a way of getting glucose into the cell without using ATP. It's still letting sodium diffuse in. So I've got two things that are letting sodium come into a cell. A leaky channel and a sodium glucose symporter, right? Because sym means in the same direction. If symporter means in the same direction, just out of curiosity, symporter, what's the opposite term for moving in different directions? An antiporter, which is what your sodium potassium pumps do, right? They're an example of an antiporter, just to put terms back into your brain. For the moment, we're not going to worry about this, what's called a sodium hydrogen exchanger. We're going to ignore that for the second, try and keep it simple. We're going to ignore the CO2 for a second. I'm going to focus on these two ways of bringing sodium in, and the idea then of water over here. If sodium comes into the cell, what happens to the concentration within the cell? It's going to increase, right? All right, so what biology term could you use dealing with water and concentrations of stuff inside of a cell versus concentrations outside of a cell?
Osmosis.
And osmosis has three different words you want to keep in mind. Hypertonic, hypotonic, and isotonic. If we add more sodium in the cell, we're adding more solute in the cell. Is the cell going to become more hypo or more hypertonic? More hypertonic. Remember, that would cause water to go to the more hypertonic environment. That's osmosis, right? The diffusion of water through a semi-permeable membrane from regions of higher concentrations of water to regions of lower concentrations of water. Water always tries to go into the more hypertonic environment. Now, is water polar or non-polar?
Polar.
It's polar. And what is a cell mainly comprised of? Lipids. Do lipids and water mix? Hell no. But water can actually fit through a cell membrane because it's small enough, but not very well. So you need really a facilitated diffusion for water. There are water channels called aquaporins. There's about 10 different kinds. But if you look at it, right, aqua for water, porin for pore, it's a water channel. And that lets water freely diffuse across the cell membrane into the cell. It's a non-gated channel. It's just facilitated diffusion. It's water's version of a leaky channel. Now here's the rule to keep in mind that I'll give for the renal stuff. Wherever water goes, wherever sodium goes, Wherever sodium goes, water wants to follow, like a puppy. So the more sodium I can get out of the filtrate into the cell, the more water will come into the cell. And then I can pump that sodium straight out into the blood. Well, that's going to make your blood a little more hypertonic. Have no worries, the water will follow that. So as I lose solutes and water, I don't change the concentration, I just lower the volume. Because I'm moving both solutes and water equally. And they're going into the peritubular capillaries. This is why I get 108 liters of water per day, because my water is following my sodium. Now there's a lot of things that are in here that they're not showing you. I want to try and convey this. I before I give you guys another, say, short little 3-minute break. So I went a little longer than I was planning on. Look at the top of the diagram where it says, well, it doesn't say it says lumen, but that's your filtrate. Whatever is in there besides water, if I remove water from this environment, can you see how the concentration of everything else in there would go up? All right? If the concentration goes up, that means the concentration gradient goes up. That means it's easier for whatever is in there to diffuse into the cell. So as I pull water out into the cell, the concentration of glucose increases, which means it's more likely to diffuse into the cell. The same thing for potassium ions, calcium ions, magnesium, amino acids. So it's like when you guys want to strengthen the flavor of soup or of a sauce, right? You let it evaporate, right? You condense. You boil off the water to increase the flavor. Well, when water leaves, we increase the flavor, but that allows more facilitated diffusion. So everybody will be diffusing into the cell, and then they all have their own little various transports on the basal side. They're only showing you sodium and glucose and hydrogens and potassiums because that's what they often wanted to show you. We're doing it to focus on sodium and water to understand why 108 liters of water can be reabsorbed in just the proximal convoluted tubule, and why we can get 99% of our organics.
And then where does the other 72 liters?
Oh, well, we'll get there.
Okay.
We got 3 more parts to go through. Okay, no worries. All right, won't get them all tonight. All right, so we just showed you how we can reabsorb from the proximal convoluted tubule. And Katie wants about the rest of our liters. And we're going to begin that after about a 3-minute break, just so you guys get some bit of a breather. We're going to talk about now this thing called a loop and what happens in the loop. So come back in about 3 or 4 minutes.